The fire smoked, the wind howled through the wooden cracks, and dozens of bodies pressed together just to stay warm. Tonight, step inside a Viking longhouse, not as a warrior, but as someone just trying to sleep. You'll hear the snoring of strangers, smell the wet wool and dried fish, and feel the icy draft sneaking under furs. Comfort? That was a luxury no Viking dared to dream of. If raw, honest glimpses into the everyday struggles of history help quiet your mind, you've found the right fireside. Subscribe now and hit the bell icon to keep exploring the cold, crowded, and quietly powerful lives of the past, one sleep-soothing story at a time. Before we continue, I'd love to know, where are you listening from? And what time is it for you right now? It's always amazing to see how far our quiet little stories are reaching. As twilight settles over the fjords of ancient Scandinavia, the north wind whispers through tall pines and across glacial waters, carrying with it the first chill of evening. Along the coastline, nestled between forest and shore, the silhouettes of longhouses emerge, their wooden frames standing sentinel against the darkening sky. These are not mere dwellings, but the very heartbeats of Viking society, places where life unfolds in all its complexity beneath protective wooden beams and thatched roofs. Imagine yourself approaching one such longhouse as day fades into night. The structure before you stretches like a sleeping giant, perhaps 70 feet in length, its curved roof resembling an overturned ship. This is no coincidence. The same skilled hands that craft the legendary Viking ships also raise these mighty halls, understanding that both must withstand the fury of northern elements and the passage of time. The origins of these remarkable structures reach back through the mists of time, long before the Viking age that would capture the imagination of history. Archaeological evidence reveals that the longhouse tradition in Scandinavia began as early as the Iron Age, around 500 BCE, evolving from smaller single-family dwellings into the grand communal spaces that would define Norse settlements for centuries to come. As you draw nearer, you notice the sturdy construction. Walls of timber, sometimes reinforced with stone and clay, designed to hold warmth within while keeping the biting cold at bay. The roof might be covered in layers of thatch, turf, or wooden shingles, depending on the local environment and available materials. No two longhouses are identical, for each represents the particular needs and resources of its community, like unique verses in the epic poem of Norse civilization. The size of these structures speaks to their importance. In the early Viking Age, from the late 8th century, houses typically ranged from 50 to 100 feet in length and 16 to 24 feet in width. The grandest examples, belonging to chieftains or jarls, could stretch to impressive dimensions, becoming not just homes but symbols of power and prosperity. The Borg Longhouse, discovered in Lofoten, Norway, measured an astonishing 270 feet in length, a true hall of legends. What drove the development of these elongated structures? The harsh northern climate provides much of the answer. In lands where winter nights stretch endlessly and temperatures plummet below freezing, survival demanded efficient use of heat and resources. The longhouse design, with its central hearth and insulated walls, created a microclimate where families could endure the brutal winter months, sharing warmth, food, and the all-important gift of companionship. But climate alone does not explain the longhouse. These structures also reflected the social organization of Viking society, communal yet hierarchical, practical yet rich with symbolic meaning. The layout of the longhouse, with its central hall where the head of the household would sit in the high seat, mirrored the social order. From this position, the master of the house could oversee all activities and receive guests with appropriate ceremony. As night deepens around our imagined longhouse, you might notice the soft glow of firelight escaping through small windows, or the smoke hole in the roof. This welcoming beacon guided family members home and signaled to travelers that shelter might be found within. Hospitality was not merely a virtue but a sacred obligation in Norse culture, where the harsh environment made refusing aid to travelers a potentially deadly insult to both guest and the gods who protected them. The development of the Longhouse was not a single event but a gradual evolution spanning centuries. Early versions had roof-supporting posts inside the walls, limiting interior space. Over time, Norse builders innovated, moving support posts to the walls themselves, creating more open central areas for gathering. By the height of the Viking Age, around the 10th century, longhouses had reached their most refined form, efficient, adaptable, and capable of housing extended families alongside their livestock during the harshest months. The introduction of Christianity to Scandinavia beginning in the late 10th century would eventually transform Norse society, including its architecture. Gradually, the great longhouses gave way to smaller individual dwellings and the growth of more permanent towns. Yet for hundreds of years, these remarkable structures stood as the center of Norse life, witnessing countless births and deaths, celebrations and sorrows, epic tales and quiet moments of daily existence. Standing before the Longhouse in our mind's eye, we might reflect on how profoundly our dwellings shape our lives and relationships. The Vikings created not just shelters but entire worlds within their wooden walls. Spaces where culture was preserved, knowledge passed down, and community bonds strengthened through long winter nights and fleeting summer days. As stars begin to emerge above, twinkling like distant hearth fires in the vast northern sky, the Longhouse before us seems to breathe with the accumulated stories of generations. From these humble yet ingenious structures sprang the culture that would send ships across unknown seas, establish trade networks spanning continents, and leave an indelible mark on world history. The wind whispers through the trees once more, carrying perhaps the echoes of ancient voices, the laughter of children playing, the songs of skalds reciting heroic poems, the practical discussions of farming and fishing that sustained life year after year. Though centuries have passed, something of that world remains whenever we gather with loved ones around a warming fire, sharing food and stories as our ancestors did in ages past. As the night deepens around us, we prepare to cross the threshold of the Longhouse, to step from our world into theirs, to understand how these remarkable buildings sheltered not just bodies, but the very soul of a civilization. For to know the Viking Longhouse is to glimpse the heart of Norse culture, practical yet mystical, harsh yet deeply human, always adapting to the challenges of existence in lands where beauty and danger walked hand in hand beneath the watchful eyes of ancient gods. The Longhouse stands patient in the gathering darkness, ready to reveal its secrets to those willing to listen to the whispers of the north wind and the stories embedded in every hand-hewn beam and smoke-darkened rafter. In the chapters ahead, we will explore this world beam by beam, season by season, understanding at last what it truly meant to call such a place home. Morning breaks over the Norwegian landscape, pale light filtering through lingering mist as birds announce the new day with tentative songs. In a clearing near the shore, activity begins early. Today marks the start of a new Longhouse construction, an event that will engage the entire community for weeks to come. The raising of a Longhouse is not merely a building project, but a ritual that binds people together, creating not just a dwelling, but a legacy that might stand for generations. The process begins with careful selection of materials, a task that requires intimate knowledge of the local environment. Tall, straight pines are sought for the main supporting posts, trees that have weathered countless storms yet grown strong and true. Oak might be used where available, particularly for the curved timbers that will form the distinctive boat-like shape of the roof. Each tree is assessed with reverent care, for the builders understand that their choices now will determine whether the structure withstands the tests of time and temperamental northern weather. Imagine yourself among this building party as the first light touches the dew-covered ground. The site has been carefully chosen, slightly elevated to avoid flooding, oriented to catch maximum sunlight while being sheltered from the prevailing winds. The builders have inherited centuries of wisdom about placement, understanding that a longhouse incorrectly situated might become unbearably cold or dangerously vulnerable to storms. The foundation begins with the driving of posts deep into the earth, massive timbers that will bear the weight of walls and roof, anchoring the structure against howling winter gales. These posts are often charred at the bottom, a technique discovered through generations of trial and error, as charring helps prevent rot where wood meets soil. In some regions, stone footings might be placed beneath these posts for additional stability and longevity. Between these mighty pillars, walls begin to take shape. Techniques vary across Scandinavia according to available resources and local tradition. In some regions, walls consist of upright planks placed side by side, creating a sturdy barrier against the elements. In others, horizontal timbers stack, one above another, with carefully cut notches binding the corners together in a technique that would later become known as log cabin construction. In areas where timber is less abundant, walls might incorporate stone, turf, or wattle and daub, flexible frameworks of woven branches plastered with a mixture of clay, straw, and sometimes animal dung or blood for binding. The work proceeds as a community endeavor with tasks divided according to skill and strength. Older members, repositories of building knowledge accumulated over lifetimes, direct younger workers in the precise methods of joining wood without the benefit of metal nails, which remain precious and rare in this age. Women and children participate, too, gathering moss for insulation, preparing food for the workers, and assisting with lighter tasks that nonetheless prove essential to the project's completion. As the walls rise day by day, the distinctive long shape of the house emerges. This elongated design serves multiple purposes. It allows for efficient use of heat from a central hearth, creates distinct zones for different activities, and can be expanded over time as a family grows in size and prosperity. Most importantly, this shape permits the spectacular roof structure that crowns the Viking Longhouse. The roof represents perhaps the greatest achievement of Norse building technology. Curved beams rise from the walls, meeting at the center to create the inverted boat shape so characteristic of these dwellings. This design sheds rain and snow effectively while creating the maximum interior space. Atop these beams, a framework of rafters and purlins provides support for the outer covering, typically layer upon layer of material designed to keep the elements at bay. The roofing process begins with a layer of wooden boards or woven branches, followed by birch bark, a naturally water-resistant material that forms a crucial waterproof membrane. Atop this might come thick layers of turf, cut from nearby meadows in careful rectangles and laid like living tiles, roots upward to bind together as they continue to grow. In regions where turf is scarce, thatch might be used instead. Bundles of reeds, straw, or heather bound together and layered meticulously to shed water away from the interior. The living roof of turf provides remarkable insulation, keeping warmth in during winter and coolness during summer months. In spring, these roofs might even bloom with wildflowers, creating the impression of a dwelling that has grown naturally from the earth itself. Throughout the construction, careful attention is paid to ventilation. Too tight a structure traps dangerous smoke from the hearth. Too open allows precious heat to escape. A smoke hole at the roof center permits the worst of the smoke to exit, while small vents near the floor create the draft necessary for proper fire maintenance. Windows, where they exist at all, remain small and few, typically covered with translucent materials like oiled animal skin or thin pieces of mica that admit some light while blocking wind. Doorways receive special consideration, both practical and symbolic. The main entrance often faces south or east to catch morning light and avoid the prevailing westerly winds. Door frames might be elaborately carved with protective symbols or representations of guardian figures, marking the threshold between the controlled environment inside and the unpredictable world beyond. Some longhouses feature a small antechamber that serves as an airlock, preventing the rush of cold air directly into the main living space when the outer door opens. As weeks pass, the interior arrangements take shape. The earthen floor is tamped, down perhaps mixed with clay for durability. In wealthier households, wooden planking might cover portions of the floor, particularly in areas where the family sleeps or entertain guests. Along the walls, sturdy posts support raised platforms that will serve as seating during the day and sleeping areas at night. These platforms, raised above the draft-prone floor, create the warmest sleeping spaces in the house. Though, as we shall see in later chapters, sleep in a Viking longhouse was an experience far removed from our modern expectations of comfort and privacy. Near the center of the longhouse, a long hearth takes shape, the literal and figurative heart of the home. Unlike our modern fireplaces, confined to walls, this elongated fire pit runs down the central axis of the building, providing heat and light to the entire space. Stone lines the pit, containing the flames, while absorbing heat that will radiate long after the fire dies down. Above, openings in the roof allow smoke to escape, though never completely. The interior will forever carry the distinctive scent of wood smoke, a smell that becomes synonymous with home for its inhabitants. In larger longhouses, particularly those belonging to chieftains or wealthy farmers, the interior might be divided into separate areas through the strategic placement of interior walls or hanging textiles. The main hall typically occupies the center, with private family spaces at one end and storage or animal quarters at the other. This arrangement allows livestock to contribute their body heat to the building during the coldest months while keeping their living areas separate from human quarters. As the construction nears completion, final touches reflect the family's status and artistic traditions. Supporting posts might be carved with intricate designs of intertwined animals or geometric patterns. In prestigious households, decorative metal fittings might adorn door hinges or important structural elements. These aesthetic choices are never merely decorative. They connect the physical structure to cultural identity and often to spiritual beliefs about protection and prosperity. The completion of a longhouse calls for celebration, a moment when the community that labored together acknowledges their achievement. Mead or ale flows freely, a feast is prepared, and perhaps a goat or sheep is sacrificed to ensure the dwelling's prosperity. The builder, often the head of the household who will inhabit the structure, might make formal declaration of thanks to those who assisted and offerings to the gods who will watch over the new home. As dusk falls once more over our newly completed longhouse, we might reflect on how this structure embodies the values of the civilization that created it. Practical yet beautiful, communal yet orderly, the longhouse represents Viking culture's remarkable balance between hard-headed pragmatism and profound appreciation for craftsmanship. Built without the benefit of modern tools or materials, these structures nevertheless achieved a sophistication of design that addressed complex environmental challenges while creating spaces for human flourishing. The newly finished longhouse stands now in the gathering darkness, smoke curling from its roof hole like an exhalation of satisfaction after work well done. Inside, the first hearth fire crackles to life, warming the earthen floor and wooden walls that will soon absorb the sounds and scents of daily life. The building breathes, settling on its foundations as wood expands and contracts, finding its equilibrium with the surrounding environment. In this moment of completion, with stars appearing overhead and the distant murmur of waves against the shore, we glimpse the profound relationship between the Norse people and their dwellings. Not just shelters, but expressions of cultural identity. Not just houses, but homes in the deepest sense. The Longhouse stands ready now to fulfill its purpose, to gather life within its walls, to shelter dreams and ambitions, to witness the passing of seasons and years as generations come and go beneath its protective roof. The first golden rays of morning light filter through the smoke hole in the Longhouse roof, creating a single beam that gradually illuminates the dwelling's interior. Dust motes dance in this column of light, swirling like tiny stars in a universe contained within wooden walls. As the beam strengthens and widens, it reveals the central hearth, a long, stone-lined fire pit where embers from the previous night's fire still glow softly beneath a layer of white ash. This hearth forms the literal and symbolic center of the Longhouse and, by extension, of Viking community life itself. Around this fire, the entire rhythm of daily existence revolves like planets around a life-giving sun. Here, food is prepared and shared, stories are told, crafts are practiced, disputes resolved, and the bonds of family and community forged through countless interactions, both momentous and mundane. As household members begin to stir from their sleeping platforms, the first task is always the same: the careful nurturing of the hearth fire. A young woman kneels beside the embers, gently blowing them to life and adding small twigs of dry birch, whose bark catches flame eagerly. This morning ritual carries profound significance, for maintaining a continuous fire represents not just practical necessity but continuity itself. In a world without matches or lighters, allowing the hearth fire to die completely would necessitate the laborious process of creating new flame through friction or sparks, a task to be avoided whenever possible. The fire grows steadily, fed by increasingly larger pieces of wood carefully selected from the household's winter store. Different woods serve different purposes: birch for quick, hot flames, pine for sustained warmth, oak for long-lasting coals. The knowledge of how to maintain the perfect fire for cooking, heating, and light represents a crucial body of wisdom, passed from generation to generation, typically from mother to daughter. Around this awakening hearth, the Longhouse itself seems to come alive. The interior, which might have appeared cavernous and shadowy in the pre-dawn darkness, now reveals itself as a complex, multifunctional space. The smoke from the fire rises toward the roof hole, though much of it lingers, creating a perpetual haze in the upper portions of the hall. This smoke layer serves an unintended but useful purpose. It helps preserve the wooden roof beams from insects and rot, while the compounds in the smoke gradually coat everything with a protective, if somewhat sticky layer. The daily gathering around the hearth follows patterns established over generations. Seating arrangements reflect the social hierarchy of the household, the highest status positions being closest to the fire, yet farthest from the smoke. The head of the household occupies the high seat or honorary chair, often elaborately carved, and positioned so its occupant can observe all activities within the Longhouse. From this vantage point, the master or mistress of the house makes decisions, passes judgment on disputes, and welcomes guests according to the sacred laws of hospitality. As the morning progresses, the hearth becomes a hub of productive activity. Women gather with cooking implements. iron cauldrons where available, or soapstone vessels in regions where metals remain precious. Into these vessels go the ingredients for the day's meals. Perhaps barley for porridge, dried fish to be rehydrated, preserved meats and whatever seasonal vegetables might be available from storage pits or winter gardens. The fire is carefully managed for cooking, with stones sometimes heated in the flames and then added to vessels to bring liquids to a simmer without placing the containers directly in the fire. The aroma of food preparation fills the longhouse. A complex bouquet of wood smoke, simmering grains, herbs gathered from summer meadows and dried for winter use, and perhaps the distinctive scent of fermenting fish. This last element might seem off-putting to our modern sensibilities, but fermentation represented a crucial preservation technique in the days before refrigeration, allowing protein sources to remain viable through the lean winter months. While meal preparation continues, other household members engage in their respective tasks. Men might repair fishing nets or craft new tools at the periphery of the fire's light. Children perform assigned chores, fetching water, feeding the smaller animals kept inside during winter, or learning skills through careful observation and gradually increasing participation. Elders, whose knowledge remains vital to the community's survival, might instruct younger members in traditional crafts or supervise the production of textiles. A never-ending task in a climate that demands substantial clothing and bedding. The central importance of the hearth extends beyond practical matters into the spiritual realm. For the pre-Christian Norse, the fire represented a connection to divine forces, particularly to Thor, whose lightning brought fire from the heavens, and to the goddess Frigg, protector of the home and family. Small offerings might be cast into the morning flames, a pinch of valuable salt, a drop of mead, or a morsel of food, to ensure continued divine favor. These practices, performed without elaborate ceremony as part of daily life, reflect the seamless integration of spiritual belief into practical existence that characterized Norse culture. By midday, the longhouse pulses with activity. The earthened floor, packed hard by generations of footsteps, bears the impressions of countless journeys between work areas. Near the walls, away from the central thoroughfare, specialized work might take place, perhaps a loom where women weave the woolen cloth essential for survival, or a corner where leather is worked into shoes, belts, and other necessary items. Wooden chests containing the household's valuables line the walls, serving both for storage and, when covered with cushions, as additional seating. The acoustics of the longhouse create a distinctive auditory environment. Sound reverberates from the high wooden rafters, creating a constant background of human activity, conversation, the rhythm of craft work, occasional laughter or disputes, the crackle of the fire, and perhaps the soft lowing of cattle or bleating of goats from the attached byre at the end of the structure, all blend into a familiar soundscape that inhabitants would recognize instantly as home. In wealthier longhouses, particularly those belonging to chieftains or jarls, the central hall might feature decorative touches that elevate it above mere shelter. Tapestries woven with scenes from mythology or family history could adorn the walls, helping to insulate while displaying the household's status. Shields might hang from posts, ready for use if needed, but also serving as demonstrations of martial prowess. In the high seat area, carved wooden panels or imported luxury items obtained through trade or raiding might be prominently displayed, silently testifying to the owner's connections and influence. As afternoon wanes and daylight begins to fade, the hearthfire takes on renewed importance. Additional logs are added, building up the flames to combat the gathering darkness. Iron lamps filled with fish oil or animal fat might be lit and placed on stands to supplement the firelight. These lamps, with their flickering yellow flames and distinctive odor, create pools of light where evening activities can continue, though much of the longhouse remains in shadow, with corners receding into darkness complete enough to conceal small treasures or secrets. The evening meal brings the household together once more around the central hearth. Food is distributed according to status, with the best portions going to the head of the household and honored guests. Yet no one goes hungry in a well-managed longhouse. The ethic of communal survival ensures that resources, while carefully allocated, are shared to maintain the strength of the entire household through harsh seasons. After the meal, as night fully claims the world outside, the hearth transforms into the center of what might be considered entertainment, though the Norse would not have drawn distinctions between practical activities and leisure in the way we do today. This is the time for storytelling, when skalds, poets, or simply knowledgeable elders recite the sagas, historical accounts, and myths that preserve cultural memory and identity. These oral traditions, passed from generation to generation through the medium of poetic recitation, contain not just entertainment but crucial knowledge, genealogies that establish kinship and inheritance rights, historical precedents that guide legal decisions, and ethical frameworks embedded in tales of gods and heroes. Around the fire, children listen wide-eyed to these recitations, absorbing cultural values and expectations while being entertained by tales of adventure and supernatural encounters. Young adults pay particular attention to stories of courtship and marriage, gleaning models for their own future relationships. Elders hear in the familiar tales echoes of their own experiences and the comfort of cultural continuity in a world of constant change. Music might accompany these gatherings, simple instruments like wooden flutes, stringed lyres, or frame. Drums producing melodies that have accompanied Norse life for centuries. Songs tell of heroic deeds, express longing for distant loved ones, or simply celebrate the changing seasons and life's persistent rhythms. In the firelight, faces appear and disappear as people move, creating a dreamlike atmosphere where the boundaries between present reality and mythic past seem to dissolve. As the evening progresses, the fire gradually diminishes, carefully banked to maintain embers through the night. Family members retreat to sleeping platforms along the walls, where stuffed mattresses of straw or wool and piles of fur coverings offer protection against the night's chill. Privacy, as we understand it today, is largely absent. The entire household sleeps in the main hall, with perhaps only thin curtains separating married couples from the communal space. The sounds of settling wood, distant animal movements, and the breathing of family members create a lullaby of security and belonging. Before sleep claims the household completely, perhaps a final prayer or invocation is offered to the gods who protect the dwelling through the vulnerable hours of darkness. Thor the thunder god, Freya the bringer of fertility and peace, or in later years as Christianity spreads through the north, prayers to Christ and his saints. All are called upon to stand guard as consciousness slips away and dreams take over. In these final moments before sleep, as the embers of the hearth glow like earthbound stars in the darkness, we might reflect on how completely the Longhouse hearth embodies the concept of community at the heart of Norse society. Neither fiercely individualistic nor rigidly collectivist, Viking culture balanced personal honor and achievement with the practical necessity of cooperation and mutual support. The hearth, with its life-giving warmth, freely shared yet carefully maintained according to established customs, perfectly symbolizes this balance, a physical manifestation of cultural values embedded in daily life. The longhouse settles into night's embrace, its wooden beams contracting slightly with the cooling air, creating occasional creaks and sighs like a living entity. Outside, Perhaps northern lights dance across the sky, visible through the smoke hole to anyone still awake. A reminder of the greater cosmos that surrounds the human-made shelter. Within these walls, generations have lived out their days, gathered around the same hearth, telling the same stories, facing the same fundamental challenges of existence in the northern lands. As sleep claims the household at last, the hearth continues its vigil, diminished but not extinguished, ready to be awakened with the first breath of morning to begin the cycle anew. In this continuity lies perhaps the greatest gift of the Longhouse, the promise that though individuals may pass away, the community endures, held together by shared space, shared work, and the shared warmth of the ever-burning hearth. The first snow comes gently to the Norse settlement, large flakes drifting down from a pearl-grey sky like feathers from some great celestial bird. Children run outside to catch them on tongues and outstretched palms, their laughter carrying across the gradually whitening landscape. But inside the Longhouse, the adults exchange knowing glances. Winter has arrived, and with it, the greatest test of survival their community will face. Winter in Scandinavia is not merely a season, but a presence, a demanding entity that transforms landscape and lifestyle alike. In the northernmost settlements, the sun will soon disappear entirely for weeks, creating the phenomenon known as polar night. Even in southern regions, daylight dwindles to precious few hours, pale and fleeting. Like a ghost at midday, this dramatic shift in light forms the backdrop against which all winter activities in the Longhouse unfold. Preparation for this season began months earlier, in the abundant days of summer and the harvest time of autumn. Hay was cut and dried. For animals, fish caught and preserved through drying, smoking, salting, or fermentation. Berries were gathered and stored in cool pits, meat from slaughtered animals smoked or preserved in whey, and vegetables like cabbage prepared through fermentation. To create what we now know as sauerkraut, grain was carefully stored in dry containers, protected from moisture and rodents. Each of these preparations represents not just food, but survival itself during the months when the land yields nothing fresh. As the first substantial snowfall blankets the settlement, the Longhouse transitions fully to its winter configuration. Any livestock still grazing outside are brought into the byre, the section of the Longhouse reserved for animals during the cold months. While this arrangement might seem strange to modern sensibilities, it serves multiple crucial purposes. The body heat of cattle, goats, sheep, and perhaps a few prized horses helps warm the entire structure. Their presence also allows for easy feeding and milking without exposing humans to the harsh elements. A low wall or partition typically separates the animal quarter from human living space, with drainage channels in the floor to manage waste. The Longhouse during winter becomes a largely self-contained world. Daily routines shift to accommodate shortened daylight hours, with most activities clustered during the brief window when sunlight filters through the smoke hole and small window openings. Imagine the interior during these winter days. Shafts of pale light illuminating floating dust particles and smoke, creating islands of visibility in the otherwise dim interior. The contrast between areas touched by daylight and those in shadow grows pronounced, influencing where people gather for tasks requiring visual acuity. The hearth fire burns nearly continuously now, consuming the carefully stacked wood that represents months of summer labor. Fuel management becomes a critical skill. Too generous a fire wastes precious resources, while too small a flame fails to warm the substantial interior space. Different woods are chosen for different purposes. Birch, bark and small twigs for quick heat when needed, pine for steady flames, and dense oak or maple for overnight burning. The smoke rising toward the roof opening, creates a distinct layering of temperature within the longhouse, warmest near the fire and at sitting height, cooler at floor level where drafts enter beneath doors and through small ventilation spaces, and surprisingly warm again near the smoke-filled rafters. Winter transforms not just the external environment, but the social dynamics within the longhouse. The community turns inward, intensifying relationships within the shared space. Activities impossible during the busy exterior work of summer now take center stage. Storytelling grows more elaborate, handicrafts receive focused attention, and knowledge is passed deliberately from elder to younger generations. This intensification of indoor communal life serves both practical needs and psychological ones, creating purpose and connection during months when isolation and darkness might otherwise lead to despair. The sensory experience of the winter longhouse would overwhelm modern visitors accustomed to climate-controlled environments. The smell becomes particularly intense. Wood smoke permeates everything, mingling with the bodily odors of humans, living in close quarters with minimal opportunity for bathing. The earthy scents of stored vegetables, the pungent tang of fermenting fish, the warm animal smells from the byre, the lanolin-rich aroma of wool being worked, all combine into a complex olfactory landscape that inhabitants would have registered, not as unpleasant, but simply as the natural condition of winter life. Sound fills the longhouse in distinctive winter patterns. Without the buffering effect of leaves on trees or the background noise of flowing water, now frozen into silence, external sounds carry differently. The crack of breaking ice, the howl of wind around corners, the muffled crunch of footsteps in snow. Inside, the acoustics of the wooden structure amplify certain frequencies while dampening others. Conversation, the rhythmic thunk of the loom, the scrape of knife on wood during carving, the soft lowing of cattle all create a winter soundscape unique to the longhouse environment. Light management becomes crucial during these dark months. The fire provides the primary illumination, supplemented by simple oil lamps. Shallow dishes of fish oil or animal fat with reed or rush wicks that produce a steady but dim yellow light. These precious light sources are used strategically, placed where most needed for essential tasks. Reflective surfaces help maximize the available light. Hanging polished metal shields or objects might be positioned to bounce firelight into darker corners. Meanwhile, some activities are performed by touch rather than sight, with skilled hands working wool or carving wood even in near darkness. The sleeping arrangements shift subtly for winter survival. Bedding platforms along the walls raised above. The draft-prone floor become even more important now. Multiple people share these platforms, sleeping close together for warmth beneath layers of wool blankets and furs. The concept of personal space contracts during winter. Necessity overcomes any preference for privacy. Family members sleep in age and gender groupings, while thralls, enslaved persons, might sleep nearer to the door where cold air intrudes most readily, another reflection of the social hierarchy embedded in every aspect of longhouse life. The key winter diet relies entirely on stored provisions, creating both nutritional challenges and monotony. The morning meal might consist of porridge made from barley or oats, perhaps flavored with preserved berries on special occasions. Midday could bring dried fish softened in water, served with hard bread and perhaps cheese from summer milk. The evening meal, typically the most substantial, might feature meat preserved through smoking or salt curing, accompanied by fermented vegetables that provide crucial vitamin C in a season when fresh produce is non-existent. Beer or mead, brewed during more abundant times, offers both calories and brief respite from the psychological weight of winter constraints. Hygiene presents particular challenges during winter months. Bathing as we understand it becomes rare, limited by water availability and the difficulty of heating sufficient quantities. Instead, spot cleaning with damp cloths must suffice for most. Hair might be combed with fine-toothed combs made of bone or wood, not just for appearance, but to control parasites, an unavoidable reality in close winter quarters. Waste management follows practical systems, human waste collected in containers for disposal outside when weather permits, or in designated areas away from the main living space. Perhaps the greatest challenge of the winter longhouse is not physical but psychological. The management of mood and mental well-being during months of darkness and confinement. Here, the cultural practices of the Norse reveal their deeper wisdom. The elaboration of storytelling during winter months is not merely entertainment, but therapeutic, creating mental journeys when physical ones become impossible. The sharing of tasks prevents any individual from bearing too much of winter's burden. Religious observances mark the passage of time, with celebrations at midwinter, later incorporated into Christmas traditions, creating anticipation and joy at the darkest point of the year. The relationship with the natural world shifts during these months. No longer does the community move freely through forests and fields. Instead, excursions outside become purposeful and brief, checking animal traps, collecting additional firewood, or maintaining essential pathways between structures. When blizzards descend, the longhouse might be cut off entirely for days, its inhabitants entirely dependent on their own resources and ingenuity until the storm passes. This cycle of connection and isolation with the broader environment shapes the Norse perspective on nature itself, neither fully adversarial nor romanticized, but understood as a powerful force requiring respect, preparation, and occasional submission. The winter longhouse serves as crucible for technology and innovation. Many of the distinctive Norse crafts, intricate wood carving, complex weaving patterns, elaborate metalwork, evolved to their height of sophistication precisely because winter provided the extended time needed for such detailed work. The constraints of the season paradoxically created space for creativity to flourish. Illuminated by firelight, a craftsperson might spend weeks perfecting a single carved panel or brooch, investing it with meanings and memories that would endure long after winter released its grip. As winter deepens toward its midpoint, the longhouse settles into a rhythm dictated by necessity and tradition. Each day follows patterns established over generations, with roles clearly understood and expectations communally enforced. This predictability provides security in a season when the external world becomes most threatening and unpredictable. The social bonds within the longhouse strengthen through shared hardship and interdependence. Disagreements must be resolved, personalities accommodated, responsibilities fulfilled, for there is literally nowhere else to go until spring returns. Around the winter solstice, the shortest day and longest night, special observances mark this crucial turning point. In pre-Christian times, this celebration known as Yule brought heightened spiritual significance. The longhouse might be decorated with evergreen boughs, symbolizing persistent life amid winter's dormancy. Extra candles or lamps might be lit in a ritual affirmation that light will return to the world. A special feast would be prepared from precious stored goods with meat from animals slaughtered at the beginning of winter and saved for this occasion. The community gathers more intentionally around the hearth, perhaps making offerings to gods and ancestors, reinforcing connections both human and divine that sustain them through darkness. As midwinter passes and imperceptibly the days begin to lengthen, the mood within the longhouse gradually shifts. Though winter's physical presence remains equally severe, indeed, the coldest weather often arrives after solstice, psychologically the community begins to orient toward survival's reward, spring's eventual return. Projects started in early winter reach completion. Seed stores are assessed for the planting to come. discussions turn more frequently to plans for the thaw season, which fields to plant first, which boats need repair, which trading journeys might prove fruitful in the coming year. Through the winter months, the Longhouse demonstrates its true genius as a structure perfectly adapted to northern survival. Its elongated design minimizes external wall exposure while maximizing internal shared space. Its roof, often covered with insulating turf, retains precious heat. Its central hearth provides both warmth and focus for community life. Even its seemingly primitive features, the smoke-filled interior, the close proximity of humans and animals, serve crucial functions in the battle against cold and darkness. What might appear to modern eyes as harsh living conditions represents instead an elegantly adapted solution to environmental challenges that would otherwise prove fatal. As we imagine the winter Longhouse in its fullness, smoke-hazed air illuminated by firelight, the murmur of voices sharing ancient stories, hands busy with essential crafts, bodies finding warmth in proximity, the scent of human and animal life intermingled, the taste of carefully preserved foods, the security of sturdy walls against howling storms. We glimpse not deprivation, but a different kind of abundance. Here, in circumstances that would overwhelm unprepared modern visitors, the Norse created sustainable community, preserved cultural knowledge, and maintained the thread of life through the most challenging season their environment presented. Snow continues to fall outside, transforming the landscape into undulating white shapes, punctuated by the dark silhouettes of trees. Inside, the Longhouse breathes with the collective life of its inhabitants, human and animal alike, creating a microclimate of survival in defiance of winter's embrace. The hearth fire flickers at the center of this world, a living heart that will continue beating until spring releases the land from frost's grip, and the community once again turns outward to greet the returning sun. The winter evening arrives early, darkness falling like a heavy cloak over the snow-covered landscape. Inside the Longhouse, the great hearth has been built up to its full strength, flames dancing high and casting animated shadows across the smoke-darkened rafters. As the evening meal concludes and wooden bowls are set aside, a subtle shift occurs in the atmosphere. The time for stories has arrived, that precious hour when the community gathers to sustain not just body, but spirit through the sharing of their cultural inheritance. An elder moves closer to the fire, his weathered face transformed by the flickering light into a landscape of shadows and glowing plains. He clears his throat, and conversations gradually diminish as attention turns toward him. Children settle cross-legged on the packed earth floor, eyes wide with anticipation. Adults continue their handwork, carving, sewing, or repairing tools, but their movements slow as they prepare to absorb the words that will soon fill the smoky air. Here now, the elder begins, using the traditional opening that signals the boundary between ordinary conversation and the sacred act of storytelling. Hear now of times before our time when the world was younger and gods walked more openly upon the earth. Thus begins one of the most essential activities of Longhouse life, the recitation of tales that form the cultural bedrock of Norse society. These are not merely entertainments to pass long winter evenings, but vehicles for transmitting knowledge, values, history, and spiritual understanding across generations. In a world before widespread literacy, where written texts remain precious and rare, memory and oral tradition serve as the primary archives of community wisdom. The tales told around the Longhouse fire span multiple categories, each serving different functions in Norse culture. Myths, explaining the creation and structure of the cosmos, provide orientation in a mysterious universe. The adventures of gods like Odin, Thor, and Freya encode complex theological ideas, while simultaneously entertaining with dramatic narratives. Tales of ancestors and legendary heroes offer models for behavior while preserving historical knowledge in memorable form. Folk tales featuring supernatural beings like trolls, elves, and landvetir, land spirits, express relationships with the natural world and its unseen dimensions. Tonight's storyteller has chosen to recount part of the great creation myth, how the world emerged from the primordial void called Ginnungagap, how the first giant Ymir was formed from ice and fire, and how the gods Odin, Vili, and Ve fashioned the world from Ymir's body after slaying him. The children listen raptly as he describes how the giant's skull became the sky, his bones the mountains, his blood the seas and lakes. Adults, though they have heard this tale countless times before, attend just as carefully, finding new meanings in familiar narratives as their own life experiences deepen their understanding. The elder's voice rises and falls with practiced rhythm, occasionally dropping to a whisper that forces listeners to lean forward, then surging with energy during moments of conflict or revelation. This vocal modulation is not merely dramatic technique, but a practical method for maintaining attention during lengthy recitations. The Norse storytelling tradition relies on formulaic elements, recurring phrases, epithets, and metrical patterns that help both teller and audience navigate extended narratives. The most skilled storytellers adapt these formulas fluidly, customizing ancient tales for present circumstances while maintaining their essential structure. As the creation myth concludes, another community member takes up the thread, offering to share a more recent history, perhaps an account of the settlement's founding or a famous voyage undertaken by a local ancestor. This interweaving of cosmic mythology with practical history characterizes the Norse approach to narrative, where divine patterns are seen reflected in human affairs and everyday events take on deeper significance when connected to archetypal stories. The Longhouse provides the ideal setting for these tellings, intimate enough for whispered secrets, yet spacious enough to accommodate gestural storytelling when tales demand physical expression. The acoustics of the wooden structure enhance vocal performance, with certain spots allowing skilled storytellers to project their voices effectively throughout the space. The central hearth creates not just warmth, but a natural focal point, the dancing flames providing visual stimulation that complements the auditory experience of the narrative. Beyond informal evening storytelling, the Longhouse hosts more formal recitations during significant celebrations and feasts. On these occasions, skalds, professional poets with years of training in complex metrical forms, might perform extended works commemorating historical events or praising powerful patrons. These performances follow strict conventions, employing specialized vocabulary and elaborate metaphorical systems called kennings, where ordinary objects or concepts are described through compound poetic phrases. A skilled skald might refer to the sea as Aegir's domain, or describe a ship as a wave horse, creating a richly elusive linguistic experience that rewards cultural knowledge and attentive listening. Music frequently accompanies these narrative traditions, though perhaps not in forms modern listeners would immediately recognize as such. Simple instruments, the stringed lyre or harp, bone flutes, drums made of wood, and animal skin provide rhythmic background or melodic interludes between narrative sections. Songs with repeated refrains invite community participation, transforming listeners into co-creators of the cultural experience. The boundaries between spoken word, chant, and song remain fluid in this tradition, with performers moving seamlessly between speech and melodic delivery as the emotional content of the narrative demands. The content of Longhouse tales reflects the practical concerns and spiritual preoccupations of Norse society. Stories often focus on the maintenance of honor, the importance of keeping oaths, the consequences of violating social norms, and the complex relationships between humans, gods, and the natural world. Tales of Thor's battles against giants, for instance, encode the constant struggle against chaotic forces threatening the ordered human world. Stories of Odin's sacrifices for wisdom reflect the Norse valuation of knowledge gained through experience and suffering. Accounts of human heroes like Sigurd the Dragon Slayer provide models of courage while acknowledging the tragic dimensions of even the most heroic lives. For children in the Longhouse, these storytelling sessions serve as primary education. Through repeated exposure to cultural narratives, they absorb not just the content of their traditions, but the values embedded within them. They learn the complex genealogies that establish relationships between families, the legal precedents encoded in tales of dispute resolution, the practical knowledge embedded in stories about seasonal activities, and the moral frameworks that will guide their own decision-making as they mature. Women's voices play a crucial role in this narrative tradition, though their contributions have sometimes been overlooked in later historical accounts. In the Longhouse setting, women often serve as keepers of family histories, genealogical knowledge, and tales related to domestic arts, healing, and relationships with the unseen world. Some tales are gendered in their transmission, certain stories and songs being passed specifically from mother to daughter or father to son, while others belong to the entire community regardless of gender. As the evening deepens and younger, children begin to drowse despite their best efforts to remain awake. The nature of the tales shifts subtly. Now come the stories meant primarily for adult ears, accounts of complex emotional situations, tales with sexual content, or narratives exploring the darker aspects of existence. These stories acknowledge the full spectrum of human experience, neither sanitizing life's difficulties nor glorifying its sorrows, but presenting them as integral to a fully lived existence. The telling of ghost stories holds special significance in the Winter Longhouse. These narratives of Draga, animate corpses, or Haugbui, mound dwellers, explore the permeable boundary between living and dead in Norse cosmology. Such tales serve psychological purposes beyond mere entertainment. They externalize fears common during the vulnerable winter months and provide contained experiences of terror, followed by resolution, allowing listeners to process anxiety within the safe context of narrative. Beyond entertainment and education, storytelling in the Longhouse fulfills crucial psychological functions for the community. During the isolation of winter, tales of distant lands expand the mental horizon beyond the confines of immediate surroundings. Humorous stories provide necessary emotional relief from the stresses of close cohabitation. Narratives focusing on spring and summer activities create anticipation for the return of warmer seasons, helping to combat winter depression. The communal experience of sharing emotional responses to narrative builds cohesion among Longhouse residents, reinforcing their identity as a unified social group despite any internal tensions or differences. The relationship between narrative tradition and religious practice becomes especially evident during seasonal celebrations. At midwinter, tales focus on the promised return of light and the eventual rebirth of the natural world. Spring festivals feature stories of divine marriages and fertility, while harvest celebrations emphasize themes of abundance and reciprocity between humans and gods. The Longhouse serves as both temple and theatre for these tellings, with certain sections sometimes designated for offerings or special decorations corresponding to the seasonal themes being narrated. As midnight approaches and the fire burns lower, the final tales of the evening often turn toward dreams and prophecy. Norse culture placed significant emphasis on dream interpretation and divination, believing that during sleep or altered states, humans might access wisdom ordinarily hidden from conscious awareness. Dreams recounted in the communal setting of the Longhouse might be analyzed by those recognized for skill in interpretation, transforming personal experience into shared wisdom. These narratives of dreams and visions form a bridge between everyday awareness and the mythic dimensions explored in earlier tales, completing the cycle of storytelling that began with cosmic creation and concludes with individual glimpses of hidden realities. When at last the formal storytelling concludes, the community does not immediately disperse to sleep. Instead, a period of quiet reflection often follows, with individuals perhaps sharing brief, personal memories triggered by the night's tales or asking clarifying questions about elements of the traditions they wish to understand more fully. This integrative discussion helps embed the narrative experience in memory and allows for the personalization of cultural material to individual circumstances. The storytelling traditions housed within the Longhouse walls would eventually face their greatest challenge with the arrival of Christianity to Norse lands. Beginning in the late 10th century, the new religion gradually transformed the cultural landscape, introducing written texts as authoritative sources and reframing many traditional narratives as either sinful superstitions or secularized folklore. Yet the resilience of oral tradition allowed many elements to survive, incorporated into Christian frameworks or preserved in remote areas where conversion came more slowly. When medieval Icelandic scribes finally recorded many Norse tales in neat manuscripts during the 12th and 13th centuries, they preserved remnants of this Longhouse oral tradition, though inevitably transformed by their new literary and religious context. As the fire burns down to glowing embers and families settle onto their sleeping platforms, the stories continue to resonate in the darkness, not just as memories of the evening's entertainment, but as living presences that shape dreams and understanding. The shared narrative experience creates a kind of invisible architecture within the physical structure of the Longhouse, a cultural space as real and supportive as the wooden beams overhead. In this warm cocoon of story, the community finds continuity with their past, meaning in their present challenges, and hope for the seasons yet to come. The last whispers fade into the rhythmic breathing of sleepers, but the tales remain, hovering in the smoky air like benevolent spirits guarding the community through the vulnerable hours of darkness. Tomorrow some details might be forgotten, but the essential patterns will remain, ready to be revived when once again the community gathers around the hearth to renew their connection to the ancient stories that define who they are and how they understand their place in the cosmos. Dear listener, as we pause midway through our journey into the world of the Viking Longhouse, I hope these tales have wrapped around you like a warm blanket on a winter's night. Let the rhythms of ancient stories and the crackling of imagined hearth fires guide you toward peaceful rest. The Longhouse has stood for centuries, and it will still be here when you return to continue our exploration. For now, breathe deeply and allow yourself to drift, cradled in the timeless embrace of Norse tradition, where dreams and stories intertwine beneath smoke-darkened rafters and starlit northern skies. The first hint of dawn filters through the smoke hole in the Longhouse roof, a faint grey lightning that gradually illuminates the sleeping forms huddled on raised platforms along the walls. In this moment, before the household fully wakes, the Longhouse exists in perfect stillness, save for the occasional soft snore, the settling of embers in the hearth, or perhaps the gentle shuffling of livestock in their section of the building. This brief interval of tranquility will soon give way to the carefully choreographed activity that characterizes daily life in a Norse dwelling. The first to rise is typically the mistress of the household or a trusted female servant, moving quietly in the dim light to rekindle the central hearth from carefully banked embers preserved overnight. This first fire tender kneels by the hearth, gently blowing on the coals until they glow red, then carefully adding small pieces of kindling, perhaps dried birch bark which catches flame readily even from the smallest spark. The sound of this morning fire-making, soft breaths, the crackle of catching flames, the careful arrangement of small sticks, forms the authentic dawn chorus of Longhouse life, a human ritual as old as civilization itself. As flames rise, from the rekindled hearth, light blooms within the Longhouse, touching first the central areas and gradually reaching toward the walls. The interior, which remained in near total darkness through the night, now reveals itself incrementally. Smoke from the new fire rises toward the roof hole, joining the residual haze that permanently occupies the upper regions of the structure. This smoke layer, though irritating to modern sensibilities, serves important functions. It helps preserve. The wooden construction from insects and rot provides a barrier against the coldest outside air and creates a constantly circulating airflow as warmed air rises and draws fresh air in through small ventilation gaps near floor level. The mistress of the house moves with practiced efficiency in these early moments, perhaps reciting a quiet prayer or charm as she works, invoking protection for the household in the vulnerable transition from night to day. In pre-Christian times, this might be an appeal to Suna, the sun goddess, or to Thor, protector against chaotic forces. After Christianization, Ave Marias or prayers to guardian saints would replace these older forms, though the psychological function remains consistent, creating a protective spiritual framework for the day ahead. As light strengthens and warmth from the fire grows, other household members begin to stir. Children might remain curled in their sleeping furs longest, while adults rise according to their duties, those responsible for animals moving first toward the byre end of the Longhouse. To begin morning milking and feeding, the sleeping platforms, raised wooden structures along the walls covered with straw mattresses and furs, gradually empty as the household transitions from rest to activity. Morning ablutions are simple by modern standards. Water carried from nearby sources and stored in wooden buckets or barrels is used sparingly for washing hands and face. A cloth might be dampened for cleaning, or in some cases water might be warmed by adding heated stones from the fire. Teeth are cleaned with frayed twigs or small pieces of wool rubbed with fine ash, which acts as an abrasive cleaning agent. Hair is combed with intricately carved bone or wooden combs, not merely for appearance, but to control parasites, an unavoidable reality in pre-modern communal living. The first meal of the day comes early, providing sustenance for morning work. This might consist of leftover bread from the previous day, perhaps dipped in whey or skyer, a yogurt-like dairy product, or a simple porridge of barley or oats cooked in the morning fire. Winter meals rely heavily on stored provisions, while summer and autumn bring fresh additions. Herbs gathered from nearby fields, eggs from nesting birds, berries from forest edges. The household eats from wooden bowls using spoons carved from wood or horn, with knives carried personally by each individual used for cutting when necessary. With bodies nourished, the day's work begins in earnest, following patterns dictated by season, weather, and the household's needs. The Longhouse functions not merely as shelter, but as production center, with different areas designated for specific activities. Near windows where light is strongest, detailed handwork takes place, perhaps embroidery, fine carving, or jewelry making. Darker areas might host activities requiring less visual acuity, spinning wool into thread using drop spindles, or preparing materials for later use. The gendered division of labor within the Longhouse generally follows patterns common to agricultural societies, though with considerable flexibility, dictated by practical necessity. Women typically manage domestic production, food preparation, textile creation, from spinning through weaving, dairy processing, and herb cultivation. Men focus on woodworking, hunting, boat building, and field labor. However, these boundaries blur depending on household composition, individual skills, and seasonal demands. A woman might excel at wood carving, traditionally considered men's work, while a man might assist with dairy processing during particularly busy periods. Children integrate into this productive environment from an early age, not through formal education as we understand it today, but through a system of graduated participation. A young child might begin by carrying small items between work areas, gradually taking on more complex tasks under supervision, and eventually mastering complete processes. This apprenticeship model ensures that essential skills transfer naturally between generations while allowing children to contribute meaningfully to household maintenance from the time they can safely do so. By midday, when the sun reaches its highest point, the entire Longhouse pulses with productive activity. The rhythmic sounds of work create a distinctive soundscape. The thump of loom beaters as women weave cloth, the scrape of knives against wood as men carve kneaded implements, the pounding of substances in mortars, the swish of brooms against earth floors, all punctuated by conversation, occasional laughter, or the cries of the youngest children. These sounds bounce from the high wooden rafters, creating an acoustic envelope that residents would recognize instantly as the signature of home. The midday meal provides a brief pause in the work rhythm. This might be a simple affair, perhaps bread with cheese or dried meat, or leftovers from the previous evening's more substantial cooking. During busy seasons when fieldwork demands maximum daylight hours, this meal might be taken outside or carried to distant work sites. In winter or poor weather, the household gathers again around the central hearth, using this opportunity not just for nourishment, but for brief consultation about the day's progress and any adjustments needed to ongoing projects. Afternoon work continues the morning's patterns, though tasks might shift to take advantage of changing light conditions. As the sun begins its descent, preparations for the evening meal commence, typically the most substantial food of the day. This preparation itself represents a major production process within the Longhouse economy. Grains must be ground for flour, vegetables cleaned and prepared, meat portioned carefully to balance immediate needs against future requirements. The hearth fire is built up for cooking, with specific fuel choices affecting both heat levels and flavor. Certain woods imparting distinct tastes to foods cooked over them. Cooking methods within the Longhouse maximize efficiency while working. Within technological constraints, iron cooking pots, where available, might be suspended directly over flames using chains or tripods. Alternatively, stones heated directly in the fire could be added to wooden or soapstone vessels to heat contents, without exposing the containers to direct flame. Breads might be baked directly on heated stones or in simple clay ovens built into or adjacent to the main hearth. Meat could be roasted on spits, boiled in pots, or smoked by hanging above the fire on racks attached to roof beams. Each method requires specific knowledge passed through generations of household management. As daylight begins to fade, the Longhouse transitions toward evening functions. Additional lamps might be lit, simple vessels of fish oil or animal fat with rush, or linen wicks that provide modest illumination for continued indoor activities. Work requiring fine detail generally concludes, giving way to maintenance tasks that can be performed with limited light, repairing tools, mending garments, or preparing materials for the next day's project. The evening meal draws the household together once more around the central hearth. Food distribution follows clear hierarchical principles, with the highest status individuals receiving choice portions, though Norse cultural values emphasize sufficiency for all household members, regardless of status. This meal typically represents the greatest variety in the daily diet, perhaps meat or fish as the central element, accompanied by bread, cooked grains, dairy products, and whatever vegetables or fruits the season and storage methods permit. Mealtime conversation follows cultural patterns, balancing formality with familial connection. The head of the household might use this gathering to share news, announce decisions affecting community welfare, or recognize individual achievements. Children learn crucial social norms through observation and guided participation in these daily gatherings. How to behave in communal settings, appropriate conversational contributions, and the complex web of relationships that define their place in society. After the evening meal, as full darkness embraces the world outside, the Longhouse transforms again, now becoming a space for activities that blend productivity with socialization and entertainment. This is when storytelling reaches its fullest expression, as we explored in our previous chapter. It is also when many textile-related activities intensify. Spinning, sewing, and tablet weaving can continue by firelight when other tasks become impractical. Men might engage in maintenance of hunting tools, carving small items, or working on intricate woodcraft projects that have both practical and artistic dimensions. The acoustic environment shifts with the evening hours. Daytime's productive cacophony gives way to more measured sounds, the rhythmic whir of spindles, the soft voices of storytellers, perhaps occasional music from simple instruments like bone flutes or stringed lyres. These gentler sounds create an auditory transition that helps signal to both body and mind that the day's most demanding work has concluded and the time for rest approaches. Preparation for sleep follows consistent patterns designed to secure the household through the vulnerable hours of darkness. The exterior door is barred securely, sometimes with specific protective rituals accompanying this action. The fire is carefully banked to maintain embers through the night without requiring constant tending, skill developed over generations of northern living. A designated individual might make a final check of animal areas to ensure all is well, with the livestock sharing the Longhouse space. Before retiring completely, household members prepare their sleeping areas, arranging furs and woolen blankets. On the raised platforms, perhaps adding fresh herbs between layers for both fragrance and insect-repelling properties. Clothing for sleep varies by season and personal status. Simple linen shifts might be worn in warmer months, while winter might call for woolen garments or even the continuation of daytime clothes for maximum warmth. Unlike modern expectations of completely disrobing for sleep, Norse practice emphasized practical warmth over changing attire. The final moments before sleep often include quiet conversation between family members sharing sleeping platforms, parents answering children's questions, couples discussing household matters in hushed tones, or simply the exchange of observations about the day just concluded. These intimate conversations, conducted in near darkness with only the faint glow of banked embers providing minimal illumination, represent some of the few truly private exchanges possible in the communal setting of the Longhouse. Sleep itself would come differently to Longhouse dwellers than to modern people accustomed to uninterrupted darkness and silence. The faint glow of the hearth, the sounds of others breathing, occasional movements of animals in their section, and the creaking of the wooden structure responding to temperature changes would create a sleep environment constantly punctuated by sensory inputs. Yet, this very tapestry of subtle sounds and sensations likely provided psychological comfort, constant reassurance of community presence during the vulnerable state of sleep. Throughout the night, the Longhouse continues its protective embrace of the sleeping household. The substantial wooden walls block harsh winds, while the roof sheds rain or snow. The residual heat from the day's fires gradually dissipates, but remains trapped sufficiently by the insulating design to prevent the interior from reaching the potentially dangerous temperatures of the world outside. Occasionally, someone might rise briefly to add wood to the fire if the night proves especially cold, but the structure itself performs much of the work of environmental management. Dreams come to the sleepers beneath the smoke-darkened rafters. Dreams shaped by the stories heard before sleep, by the physical sensations of the sleeping environment, and by the culturally specific understanding of what dreams might mean. Norse tradition placed special significance on dreams as potential communications from gods, ancestors, or as portents of future events. Particularly vivid or unusual dreams might be remembered for sharing the next morning, when those with reputation for dream interpretation could help extract meaning from these nighttime visions. Eventually, the first faint lightening of the sky above the smoke hole signals the approach of dawn once more. The cycle prepares to begin again. The first fire tender will rise, coax flames from carefully preserved embers, and set in motion another day of life within the wooden walls of the Longhouse. This daily rhythm, repeated through countless generations, creates not just physical survival but cultural continuity, each day both echoing those that came before and preparing the ground for those that will follow. In contemplating this daily cycle, we glimpse perhaps the most profound truth about the Longhouse. It represents not merely a building but a complete system for organizing human existence. Through carefully evolved spatial arrangements, technological adaptations, and social conventions, the Longhouse creates a functioning micro-world where all essential human needs can be met within a single structure. Food, shelter, social connection, knowledge transmission, spiritual practice, artistic expression, and economic production all occur within these walls, integrated into a seamless whole that sustains life through the harshest conditions the northern world can present. The genius of the Longhouse lies not in technological sophistication as we might understand it today, but in the elegant integration of multiple solutions to the complex problem of northern survival. Each element, from the hearth's placement to the sleeping platform's height, from the roof's construction to the organization of work areas, represents accumulated wisdom about how humans might not merely survive, but create meaning and beauty in an environment that offers both extraordinary challenges and remarkable gifts. As twilight returns and another day concludes within the Longhouse walls, we might reflect on how completely this structure shaped the consciousness of those who dwelled within it, creating patterns of thought, relationship, and cultural expression that would eventually influence much wider worlds through the expansive journeys of the Viking Age. The daily rhythms established within these wooden halls created the foundation for a civilization whose reach would ultimately extend far beyond the northern lands of its birth. If you were to close your eyes and step across the threshold of a Viking longhouse, your first sensation would be the enveloping embrace of its unique atmosphere. A complex sensory tapestry so different from our modern environments that it might initially overwhelm you. Before vision could orient you to the physical layout, your other senses would already be immersed in the distinctive reality of Longhouse life. This sensory world, familiar and comforting to its inhabitants, yet startlingly intense to unaccustomed visitors, reveals dimensions of Norse existence impossible to understand through historical texts or archaeological remains alone. The smell of the Longhouse would reach you first, a layered olfactory landscape that modern people, accustomed to odor-neutral environments, might initially find overwhelming. Wood smoke dominates this sensory realm, a constant presence from the ever-burning central hearth. This is not the occasional pleasant scent of a modern campfire, but a pervasive element that permeates everything: clothing, hair, wooden surfaces, and food. Over time, different woods used for fuel add subtle variations to this base note. Resinous pine creating sharp, bright overtones, while dense oak produces a deeper, more substantial presence. Beneath the wood smoke foundation lies a complex bouquet of organic aromas. The natural oils in wooden construction elements, walls, roof beams, support posts, emit their own subtle fragrances, enhanced by the constant exposure to warmth and smoke. Animal scents drift from the byre end of the structure, mixing with the distinctive aromas of human bodies living in close proximity with limited opportunities for bathing by modern standards. Yet what modern sensibilities might interpret as unpleasant would register entirely differently to Norse perception. These were simply the expected elements of a properly functioning household, no more remarkable than the electronic hum that forms the background of contemporary environments. Food preparation adds another dimension to the olfactory experience, fermented fish being prepared for storage, bread baking on heated stones, meat smoking on racks above the fire, herbs drying from roof beams. These productive scents signal specific activities and create temporal landmarks throughout the day. The smell of morning porridge bubbling in cooking vessels announces the transition from sleep to activity as surely as any timepiece. The afternoon aroma of ale brewing in wooden vats marks not just a practical process, but the preparation for eventual social bonding through shared consumption. The soundscape of the Longhouse creates an equally distinctive sensory layer. The acoustic properties of the wooden structure, high-peaked roofs, hard reflective surfaces, minimal sound-absorbing materials, create an environment where sounds carry, blend, and sometimes amplify. The constant background includes the subtle crackling of the hearth fire, the soft shuffling of livestock in their section, the creaking of wooden elements responding to temperature changes, and the whisper of draft currents circulating through the space. This ambient sound floor establishes a baseline against which specific activities emerge in acoustic relief. Human-generated sounds punctuate this background. The rhythmic thump of the loom beating new rows of weaving into place, the scrape of knife against wood in carving activities, the pounding of substances being ground in wooden mortars, voices in conversation or song, children's play, and occasional laughter. These productive sounds create an acoustic map of activity throughout the structure, allowing inhabitants to track household functions even without visual confirmation. An experienced resident could determine precisely what activities were occurring in different areas of the Longhouse simply by the distinctive sound patterns they generated. The tactile dimension of Longhouse life provides another rich sensory field. Imagine running your hand along interior surfaces, walls revealing the adze marks from their shaping, support posts worn smooth by generations of touching hands, benches polished by countless bodies sitting in the same spots day after day. The constant presence of wood smoke creates a slightly tacky film on surfaces, while temperature variations between areas near the hearth and those closer to exterior walls create distinct microclimates within the single space. The materials encountered in daily activity provide a diverse tactile library. Rough wool, straight from shearing, gradually transformed through processing into soft fabric, supple leather in various stages of preparation, smooth soapstone vessels, cool to the touch even when containing warm contents, iron implements with their distinctive weight and temperature conductivity, antler and bone materials used for tools and decorative elements. Each substance requires specific handling techniques, creating embodied knowledge passed between generations through direct demonstration rather than verbal instruction. Vision within the Longhouse presents a dramatic contrast to modern, illuminated environments. During daylight hours, light enters primarily through the smoke hole in the roof and perhaps small window openings covered with translucent materials like animal membrane or thin pieces of mica. This creates a distinctive pattern of illumination. Pools of brighter light surrounded by deepening shadow, with the contrast growing more pronounced in areas distant from these light sources. The hearth fire provides additional illumination that shifts and flickers, causing shadows to dance across walls and faces. This lighting environment would shape visual perception in specific ways. Inhabitants would develop heightened sensitivity to subtle variations in shadow and indirect light. Tasks requiring fine visual discrimination would naturally migrate to areas with better illumination, while those relying more on touch than sight could occur in dimmer regions. The concept of completely uniform lighting throughout a space, taken for granted in modern environments, would be entirely foreign to Longhouse dwellers. At night, illumination becomes even more dramatic and limited. The hearth fire provides the primary light source, supplemented perhaps by simple oil lamps with floating wicks that produce a steady but dim glow. Areas distant from these light sources recede into near total darkness, creating distinct zones of visibility and invisibility within the single structure. Activities requiring vision naturally cluster around light sources, while sleeping areas along walls become enclaves of darkness and privacy despite their physical openness. This distinctive sensory environment profoundly shaped Norse consciousness in ways difficult for modern people to fully comprehend. The ever-present smoke created a particular relationship with breathing. Inhabitants developed techniques for minimizing inhalation in the smokiest upper regions of the structure, perhaps unconsciously altering their posture and breathing patterns in different areas. Their clothing would carry the smoke scent with them even when they ventured outside, creating an olfactory connection to home that reinforced identity and belonging. Sleep within this sensory landscape differed dramatically from modern expectations. Rather than the complete darkness and silence many now consider ideal for rest, Longhouse dwellers drifted into sleep surrounded by the gentle sounds of the structure itself. The occasional pop from the banked hearth fire, the soft breathing of family members nearby, perhaps the shuffling movement of animals in their section. The faint glow of embers might provide minimal orientation points in the darkness, while the familiar smells of wood smoke, woolen bedding, and the bodies of family members created an olfactory cocoon of security. Dreams within the Longhouse might be influenced by this rich sensory backdrop. Modern sleep research suggests that external stimuli can be incorporated into dream content. The crack of a settling beam perhaps transformed in sleeping consciousness into the breaking of ice on a spring-swollen river, or the distant lowing of cattle becoming the call of supernatural creatures in the dreamscape. Norse culture placed significant importance on dreams as potential sources of insight or divine communication, and the particular sensory conditions of Longhouse sleep may have contributed to distinctive dream experiences that reinforced cultural beliefs about the permeable boundary between waking and dreaming consciousness. Children born and raised within this sensory environment would develop perceptual frameworks entirely different from modern ones. From their earliest moments, they would internalize the Longhouse's sensory patterns as the baseline of normal experience. Their developing nervous systems would attune to detecting subtle variations against this background. The slightly altered sound of the roof under heavy snow accumulation, the changed smell when bread began to overbake on the hearthstones, the distinctive footfall pattern of different family members moving through the space. This heightened sensitivity to environmental nuance would serve them well in a world where survival often depended on detecting small changes before they became critical problems. The sensory experience of the Longhouse varied with the seasons. creating a cyclical pattern of perceptual shifts that marked time as surely as any calendar. Winter intensified the interior sensory world. Doors opened less frequently, preserved the accumulated smells and sounds within the structure, while the contrast between the frigid exterior and the hearth's warmth became more pronounced. Summer brought greater ventilation, more activity moving between indoor and outdoor spaces, and distinct changes in food preparation methods and resulting aromas. These seasonal variations created a temporal rhythm experienced bodily rather than abstractly. Cultural adaptations to this sensory environment reveal themselves in Norse aesthetic preferences and social conventions. The elaborate carving often found on interior wooden elements, support posts, high seats, door frames, creates tactical interest and visual detail that would be appreciated in the specific lighting conditions of the Longhouse. The preference for bright colors and metallic elements in clothing and personal adornment makes sense in an environment where such items would catch and reflect the limited available light, becoming more visible than subtle hues or matte finishes. The shared sensory experience within the Longhouse reinforced social bonds in ways foreign to modern understanding. To share the same air filled with the same complex mixture of smells, to attune to the same subtle acoustic signals, to navigate together through the same patterns of light and shadow, these created embodied connections beneath the level of conscious awareness. The physical experience of coexistence within this sensory bubble likely contributed to the strong group identity characteristic of Norse society, where individual welfare remained inextricably linked to community belonging. For visitors to the Longhouse, traders from distant lands, travelers seeking temporary shelter, or allies from neighboring settlements, this sensory immersion would create immediate and powerful impressions. The distinctive sensory signature of each Longhouse might convey information about the household's prosperity, cleanliness standards, food resources, and cultural practices. These impressions would form before any verbal exchange, creating a substrate of sensory judgment upon which social interactions would build. The transition between the sensory world of the Longhouse and the natural environment outside created daily experiences of contrast and recalibration. Stepping from the smoke-filled, close atmosphere of the interior into the clear air and expansive visual field of the exterior would require momentary sensory adjustment. This threshold experience, repeated multiple times daily throughout life, perhaps contributed to the Norse conceptual division between Inangards, the ordered, human-controlled indoor world, and Utangards, the outer realm where different forces held sway. Archaeological evidence occasionally provides tantalizing glimpses of this lost sensory world. Residue analysis from cooking vessels reveals specific food compounds that might suggest aromas. The discovery of musical instruments allows reconstruction of possible sounds. Preserved textile fragments hint at tactile experiences. Yet the full integration of these elements into the lived sensory experience of Longhouse dwelling remains elusive, accessible primarily through informed imagination and cross-cultural comparison with traditional living environments that maintain some similar characteristics. As evening deepens within our imagined Longhouse, the sensory experience intensifies in particular ways. The fire's light becomes more prominent against the gathering darkness outside, creating stronger contrasts between illuminated areas and shadows. Sounds seem to carry differently in the night air, with subtle noises becoming more noticeable as major activities cease. The smoke, which during day might have created a layered stratification from floor to ceiling, often settles somewhat as temperature differences between interior and exterior decrease, creating a more evenly distributed presence. This is the time when sensory perception might shift toward the numinous or magical dimensions that permeated Norse understanding of reality. In the flickering firelight, Shadows might momentarily resemble figures from myth or legend. The intricate carvings on wooden posts, animated by shifting light, could seem to move or change expression. The boundary between the ordinary sensory world and the realm of spirits, ancestors, or supernatural beings might feel most permeable in these evening hours when ordinary perception becomes less certain and dreams begin to touch the edges of waking consciousness. For modern visitors imagining this sensory landscape, the initial impression might be one of overwhelming intensity. Our senses, attuned to environments designed specifically to minimize strong sensory inputs, would require significant adjustment to this rich, perceptual field. Yet we might also recognize, perhaps with surprise, the profound sense of connection such an environment could foster. Connection to others, sharing the space, to the materials and processes sustaining daily life, and to the direct sensory experience often muted in contemporary environments. In this sensory immersion, we glimpse perhaps the greatest difference between Longhouse dwelling and modern living. The Norse experienced their environment through continuous, unavoidable sensory engagement, not as something separate from themselves, but as a constantly present reality in which they were embedded. The smoke did not exist as a problem to be eliminated, but as an expected element of proper shelter, bringing both challenges and benefits. The close proximity of others, with all the associated sensory awareness of their presence, represented not an invasion of privacy, but the natural condition of human existence. As we drift towards sleep within the imagined Longhouse, our modern consciousness gradually surrendering to this different sensory reality, we might experience a peculiar sense of homecoming, as though some ancient part of our human inheritance recognizes this environment at a level deeper than rational understanding. The smoke and dreams of the Longhouse represent not just historical curiosity, but an alternative mode of human environmental relationship, one that engaged all senses in continuous, meaningful participation with the immediate surroundings and the community sharing them. The wooden walls of the Longhouse, darkened by years of smoke and touched by countless hands, contained within them not just people, but an entire sensory world, one that shaped perception, reinforced cultural values, and created a distinctive consciousness now lost to us except through deliberate acts of historical imagination. Yet in that imagination, undertaken with knowledge and empathy, we might briefly touch the sensory reality that formed our ancestors and continues to echo, however faintly, in our own embodied experiences of home, community, and shelter. As morning light gradually strengthens within the Longhouse, it reveals not just the physical structure, but the complex human relationships contained within these wooden walls. Where modern dwellings separate families into distinct houses and individuals into private rooms, the Longhouse gathered an entire social world under a single roof. This shared living space shaped Norse social dynamics in profound ways, creating patterns of interaction, hierarchy, cooperation, and conflict, resolution that defined daily existence. The social unit occupying a typical Longhouse extended far beyond the modern concept of a nuclear family. At its center might be a married couple and their children, but expanding outward from this core would be an elaborate constellation of relationships: aging parents, unmarried siblings, more distant relatives, fallen on hard times, servants, workers, and, in some households, thralls, enslaved individuals. This extended household functioned as both an economic unit and a social community, with every member assigned specific roles based on age, gender, skill, and status. Imagine awakening within this social ecosystem as daylight begins to illuminate the interior. Your first awareness would be of others, their sounds, movements, and presence forming the backdrop of consciousness even before full wakefulness arrives. Privacy, as we understand it today, simply did not exist. From birth to death, Norse individuals lived in constant awareness of being seen, heard, and evaluated by their household community. This persistent visibility profoundly shaped both behavior and psychological development, creating personalities adapted to continuous social integration rather than individual isolation. The physical layout of the Longhouse reinforced social hierarchies while simultaneously creating shared experience. The high seat, an elaborately carved chair or bench positioned prominently near the central hearth, visually established the household leader's authority. This position, typically occupied by the male head of household during significant gatherings, represented not just individual power, but responsibility for the entire community's welfare. From this seat, disputes would be settled, guests welcomed, and major decisions announced that would affect everyone under the roof. Women's authority, though less visually dramatic in its presentation, operated with equal importance in different domains. The mistress of the household controlled food stores, literally holding the keys to storage areas in larger establishments, a symbol of her authority that appears frequently in Norse literature and archaeological findings. This control over essential resources gave women significant practical power regardless of formal social structures. The areas associated with female activities, particularly food preparation spaces and textile production zones, fell under the governance of the senior woman, who directed other female household members in these crucial economic functions. Children within the Longhouse grew up with multiple adult influences rather than the exclusive parent-child relationships common in modern families. Responsibility for childcare dispersed among various household members, with older children often minding younger ones while adults engaged in productive labor. This created cross-generational bonds not limited to biological parentage. A child might learn specific skills from an uncle with particular expertise, receive stories and cultural knowledge from grandparents, and absorb practical household management from unrelated adult women working alongside their mother. The socialization of children occurred through continuous immersion rather than formal instruction. From their earliest awareness, children observed the entire cycle of adult activities playing out within the Longhouse, witnessing birth and death, healing and illness, conflict and reconciliation, work and celebration. Rather than being sheltered from adult realities, children participated in them at gradually increasing levels of involvement appropriate to their developing capabilities. This apprenticeship model of childhood created individuals intimately familiar with all aspects of their culture's practical knowledge long before reaching adulthood. Adolescence within the Longhouse setting followed different patterns than in a modern society. Young people would take on increasingly adult responsibilities while still under the guidance of the extended household. Young men might begin participating in hunting expeditions, fishing ventures, or trading journeys, returning to the security of the Longhouse between these gradually expanding explorations of the wider world. Young women would assume more significant roles in household production, particularly textiles, food preservation, and dairy processing, while still under the supervision of more experienced women who could correct mistakes and transfer specialized knowledge. Marriage represented not just a union between individuals, but an alliance between households and sometimes entire kin groups. The new couple might initially reside in the groom's family Longhouse, with the bride entering an established social hierarchy where she would need to find her place. In wealthier families with sufficient resources, a new Longhouse might eventually be constructed for the young couple as they established their own household. The Longhouse itself thus became both the setting for marriage negotiations, elaborate social contracts discussed around the central hearth, and the prize that confirmed successful transition to full adult status. For the elderly, the Longhouse provided security in a world without retirement plans or elder care facilities. Aging parents would continue living within the household their children now managed, transitioning gradually from leadership to advisory roles. This arrangement guaranteed physical care while preserving the elders' dignity through continued participation. in household activities according to their remaining capabilities. The Norse respected age for the accumulated wisdom it represented, with elderly members often serving as repositories of genealogical knowledge, legal precedents, and traditional techniques too complex to be recorded in written form. Servants and workers occupied intermediate positions in the Longhouse social structure. Neither family members nor property, but individuals bound to the household through various arrangements of service in exchange for protection and sustenance. These relationships varied widely in their formality and permanence. A craftsperson might attach to a wealthy household temporarily to complete specific work, living within the Longhouse during this period. Orphaned children from related families might be incorporated as permanent servants, gradually becoming almost family members through long association. The physical space these individuals occupied within the Longhouse, typically areas further from the central hearth, visually represented their intermediate status. At the lowest level of this social hierarchy were thralls, enslaved individuals, acquired through warfare, raiding, trade, or as payment for debts. Norse slavery differed from later plantation systems in several important aspects. Thralls lived within the same structure as their owners, sharing the Longhouse environment, though assigned the least desirable sleeping locations, typically nearest drafty doors or in the animal byre. They participated in the same productive activities, ate similar, if lower quality, food, and in some cases could eventually purchase their freedom through service or special skills. Their children, however, inherited their status, creating multi-generational enslaved families within the household structure. The constant proximity enforced by Longhouse architecture necessitated sophisticated mechanisms for conflict management. Minor disputes could not be resolved by simply avoiding the other party, as modern housing allows. Instead, Norse culture developed elaborate systems for addressing grievances, from formal arbitration by the household head to the involvement of outside authorities for more serious matters. The cultural emphasis on maintaining frith, peace within the household, reflected practical necessity as much as moral value. A household torn by internal conflict could not successfully manage the cooperative labor required for Northern's survival. Social regulation occurred largely through the powerful mechanisms of honor and shame in this environment of constant visibility. Actions were witnessed, evaluated, and remembered by the entire household. Reputation, both personal and familial, represented a tangible asset affecting everything from marriage prospects to trading relationships. The knowledge that behavior would be observed and judged by community members whose opinions carried real consequences created strong incentives for adherence to social norms without requiring formal enforcement mechanisms. The Longhouse also served as the primary setting for the celebration of life transition. Births occurred within its walls, with midwives and female relatives attending the mother in a section temporarily screened for minimal privacy. Naming ceremonies welcomed the new member into both household and broader kin group, often taking place around the central hearth with the entire community as witnesses. Marriages were celebrated with feasts that demonstrated the household's prosperity while cementing new alliances. Deaths were marked by washing and preparing the body within the same space where the person had lived before burial, according to community traditions. Religious practices permeated daily life rather than being relegated to separate sacred spaces. The hearth itself held spiritual significance as the living center of the household, sometimes receiving small offerings as part of daily activities. In pre-Christian times, small figurines representing gods might occupy honored locations within the Longhouse, receiving occasional offerings or serving as focal points for household rituals marking seasonal transitions. After Christianization, crosses or images of saints might replace these earlier objects. Though the integration of spiritual practice into household life continued, hospitality within the Longhouse operated according to formal customs that balanced openness with security. Visitors were simultaneously potential threats and valuable connections to the wider world. The architecture reflected this duality. A single entrance allowed for control over who entered, while the central hearth provided a welcoming focus for guests once admitted. Travelers might be offered bench space for sleeping and included in meals, with the quality of hospitality offered reflecting on the household's honor. This practice created networks of reciprocal obligation, extending far beyond immediate family connections. Feasting represented the pinnacle of Longhouse social function. On significant occasions, weddings, funeral memorials, seasonal celebrations, or to honor important visitors, the household would transform its daily eating arrangements into more elaborate gatherings. These events followed carefully choreographed patterns with seating arrangements reflecting status, toasting sequences acknowledging social bonds, and food presentation demonstrating both prosperity and generosity. Such feasts served multiple functions, reinforcing internal hierarchy, displaying household resources to outside observers, creating obligations through hospitality, and strengthening community bonds through shared celebration. Storytelling, as we explored in an earlier chapter, played a crucial role in creating collective identity within the Longhouse community. Evening recitations of sagas, myths, and family histories provided entertainment while simultaneously reinforcing shared values and cultural knowledge. These narratives often contained models for proper behavior in various social situations, presenting exemplary figures whose actions could be emulated or cautionary tales of those who violated important norms. Through repeated exposure to these stories, household members internalized a common ethical framework despite their different roles within the social hierarchy. The long winter evenings intensified social dynamics within the Longhouse, forcing closer proximity when outdoor activities became impossible. This season might bring increased tensions as individuals spent months in constant contact, but it also fostered deeper bonds through shared activities like handicrafts, games, and extended storytelling cycles. Winter-specific social practices evolved to manage this intensity. Formal turn-taking in conversation, designated quiet periods, and occasional community celebrations to break the monotony and release accumulated social pressure. Gender relations. Within the Longhouse balanced separation and integration in complex ways. Men and women occupied different domains of authority and expertise, with certain spaces and activities gendered accordingly. Yet the shared living environment prevented the extreme separation found in some other historical cultures. Men would witness childbirth and food preparation. Women would observe political discussions and craft production. This overlap created mutual understanding of each gender's contributions to household survival that may have moderated the hierarchical aspects of Norse gender systems. Throughout all these social dynamics ran the central reality of interdependence. The harsh northern environment made survival as isolated individuals nearly impossible. The Longhouse, with its integration of multiple generations and social roles under a single roof, physically embodied the truth that Norse culture acknowledged pragmatically. Human flourishing required connection, cooperation, and community. Every member contributed according to their capacity, creating a resilient social organism capable of weathering literal and metaphorical storms that would overwhelm less integrated groups. As evening returns to our imagined Longhouse, and the household gathers once more around the central hearth, we might observe how the day's accumulated interactions, moments of connection, minor conflicts, shared labor, exchanged knowledge, mutual support, have woven another thread in the complex social fabric that sustains this community. Each glance, word, and gesture carries meanings shaped by past interactions and future expectations, creating patterns of relationship as intricate as the most elaborate Nordic knotwork. The physical structure of the Longhouse, with its single, shared space organized around the life-giving hearth, serves as both stage and shaping force for these social dynamics. The architecture itself expresses core cultural values: the importance of community over isolation, the necessity of cooperation despite status differences, the integration of all life aspects from the practical to the sacred within a single, encompassing structure. The social patterns that evolved within these wooden walls perfectly suited the environmental challenges and resource limitations of the northern world, creating communities resilient enough to not merely survive, but eventually expand their influence far beyond their original territories. As night deepens and the household settles towards sleep, the social bonds forged through countless daily interactions continue their invisible work, providing security, identity, and meaning for each individual within the greater whole. Like the interlocking wooden beams that support the Longhouse roof, these social connections distribute the weight of existence so that no single member must bear it alone. In this fundamental truth lies perhaps the deepest wisdom of Longhouse living, that human beings find their greatest strength not in isolation, but in the careful, sometimes challenging, always essential web of connection with others who share their shelter against the darkness outside. The pale green shoots of spring grass emerge through the edges of the turf roof, transforming the Longhouse from a snow-draped winter shelter into a living extension of the reawakening landscape. This seasonal metamorphosis represents just one of countless adaptations through which the Norse dwelling responds to nature's changing moods. Far from being a static structure imposing human will upon the environment, the Longhouse exists in dynamic conversation with the natural world, responding, adjusting, and adapting to the powerful forces of a northern climate that can never be fully controlled, only accommodated. Imagine standing before a traditional Longhouse as spring softens. The landscape, the structure seems almost to breathe with the warming air. Wooden elements expanding slightly as temperatures rise, the roof's living layer of turf beginning its annual growth cycle, the very character of the building shifting subtly as it transitions from winter fortress to summer dwelling. This responsiveness to seasonal change represents one of the Longhouse's most remarkable features, revealing Norse ingenuity in creating a single structure versatile enough to provide appropriate shelter throughout the year's dramatic environmental transformations. The roof exemplifies this adaptive genius. In regions where turf construction was common, the roof consisted of multiple layers, wooden boards providing structural support, birch bark creating a waterproof membrane, and finally thick sections of living turf placed grass side up. As spring arrives, this turf awakens, its dormant root systems reactivating to bind the sections more tightly together. Small flowers might bloom across the roof's expanse, creating a meadow elevated above the ground. Beyond its aesthetic appeal, this living roof provides remarkable environmental benefits, insulating against both cold and heat, absorbing rainfall to prevent leaks, and naturally repairing minor damage through plant growth. With warming temperatures, the Longhouse ventilation system undergoes seasonal adjustment. The small vents near floor level, perhaps partially blocked during winter to prevent drafts, are now fully opened to encourage air circulation. The smoke hole in the roof might be enlarged by removing sections of adjustable covering, allowing greater exchange between interior and exterior air. These modifications transform the Longhouse from a tightly sealed winter cocoon to a more breathable summer dwelling, mitigating the heat generated by cooking fires and human activity within the shared space. Spring cleaning represents not merely a tradition, but a necessary recalibration of the living environment after winter's confinement. The accumulated soot of winter fires is scraped from interior walls and rafters, with the carbon-rich material sometimes repurposed as fertilizer for garden plots. Bedding materials, straw mattresses and woolen blankets, are taken outside for thorough airing and sunning, refreshing them after months of indoor use. The packed earth floor might be partially renewed, with fresh clay or sand covering worn areas and new rushes or herbs scattered to improve both footing and fragrance. The Longhouse's relationship with water transforms with the seasons. During spring thaw's careful attention focuses on drainage around the structure's perimeter, with channels maintained to direct snowmelt away from foundations. The roof, designed to shed precipitation effectively, now handles gentle spring rains rather than winter snow loads. Water collection systems, simple wooden gutters or strategically placed barrels, might be positioned to capture rainfall. For household use, supplementing other water sources and acknowledging rain as resource rather than merely intrusion to be resisted. As summer approaches, the activities within the Longhouse expand outward, creating a more porous boundary between interior and exterior spaces. Cooking might move partially outside, with external fire pits reducing indoor heat while maintaining connected workspace. Doors remain open during daylight hours, creating cross-ventilation and extended sight lines that incorporate adjacent outdoor areas into the effective living space. Work requiring good light, detailed textile production, fine carving, precise crafting, migrates to outdoor locations while maintaining proximity to the Longhouse's resources and shelter. The summer. Longhouse functions differently from its winter configuration, with interior spaces repurposed according to seasonal needs. Areas used for livestock housing during winter months might be thoroughly cleaned and converted to additional human living space or storage for the warm season. Sleeping arrangements could shift, with some household members choosing to sleep on covered porches or in outbuildings to escape the residual warmth that makes the Longhouse interior less comfortable on hot summer nights. The structure adapts to changing human patterns just as humans adapt to its seasonal character. Light transformation represents another dramatic seasonal shift. The Longhouse design, with limited window openings and a focus on heat conservation, creates a relatively dark interior during winter months. Summer brings extended daylight, reaching to nearly continuous light in northernmost settlements during midsummer. This abundance of natural illumination penetrates the structure differently, altering the interior atmosphere and changing how spaces are used. Areas too dark for detailed work in winter become fully functional in summer's extended light, expanding the building's effective usable space. The relationship with fire, the literal and metaphorical heart of the Longhouse, shifts with the seasons. Winter requires constant, substantial burning for both heat and light. Summer allows more intermittent fire use, focused primarily on cooking rather than space heating. This seasonal fire management represents both practical adaptation and sophisticated environmental awareness, adjusting human consumption of a limited resource, firewood, according to genuine need rather than maintaining constant usage regardless of conditions. Autumn brings another cycle of adaptive transformation as the Longhouse prepares to return to its winter configuration. The roof's vegetation gradually becomes dormant, while providing one final insulation benefit as dried grasses trap air pockets before winter snows create an additional protective layer. Interior spaces are reorganized once more, with areas prepared for livestock returning indoors as temperatures drop. Foodstuffs harvested during the productive months are integrated into storage systems within or adjacent to the dwelling, their presence physically embodying the household's preparation for winter scarcity. Beyond these seasonal adaptations, the Longhouse demonstrates remarkable responsiveness to weather events of all kinds. During heavy rainstorms, temporary adjustments might be made, interior containers positioned under known weak points in the roof, additional water diverting systems deployed around the foundation perimeter, activities reorganized to accommodate any water infiltration without disrupting essential functions. The structure's design anticipates these challenges, incorporating sufficient flexibility to maintain habitability even when conditions become temporarily more challenging. Wind, i.e., constant presence in many Norse settlements, receives particular attention in Longhouse design and seasonal adaptation. The structure's aerodynamic profile, body low, elongated with rounded or sloped roof, minimizes wind resistance while channeling airflow around rather than against the building. Seasonal adjustments might include additional external bracing. During storm seasons, temporary windbreaks positioned near entrances, or interior rearrangement to minimize the effects of drafts during particularly windy periods. The Longhouse does not attempt to eliminate wind's influence, but rather to exist in strategic relationship with this powerful natural force. Temperature regulation within the Longhouse relies on passive systems that function across seasons with minimal active management. The substantial thermal mass of earth floors and turf roofs moderates temperature swings by absorbing excess heat during warm periods and radiating stored warmth during cooler times. Thick walls with insulating materials create effective barriers against extreme outdoor temperatures. Interior spatial organization with sleeping platforms raised above the cooler floor level and household activities concentrated in the more moderate central areas allows inhabitants to find appropriate thermal conditions for different activities regardless of season. Humidity control represents another elegant feature of traditional Longhouse design. The hygroscopic properties of natural building materials, wood, turf, clay, straw, allow them to absorb excess moisture during humid conditions and release it back during drier periods. This passive buffering helps maintain interior conditions within a comfortable range despite external fluctuations. Seasonal adjustments to ventilation, fire usage, and interior arrangements work with these material properties to create remarkably stable humidity levels that protect both human health and stored possessions from damage. The Longhouse's relationship with local ecosystems extends beyond its physical structure to include surrounding plant communities intentionally managed for building maintenance. Certain grasses might be encouraged near the dwelling for roof repair materials. Specific trees could be coppiced, cut to encourage multiple straight stems to provide future replacement poles or rafters. Birch trees might be maintained for their valuable bark used in roof waterproofing. Through these practices, the Longhouse becomes not just a single structure but the center of a managed landscape zone that provides for its ongoing maintenance needs across seasons and years. This ecological integration extends to waste management systems that shift with seasonal conditions. Winter might necessitate more interior collection and storage of wastes for periodic disposal, while summer allows more direct cycling of household byproducts into adjacent garden systems. Animal wastes, collected during the winter housing period, become valuable fertilizer for spring planting. Even the carbon-rich soot from winter fires finds appropriate uses in garden soils. These practices reflect sophisticated understanding of material cycles that maintain fertility and productivity in challenging northern environments. Water management similarly demonstrates seasonal adaptation. Winter snow might be collected and melted for household use, supplementing liquid water sources that become less accessible during freezing conditions. Spring runoff requires careful channeling to prevent damage to the Longhouse foundations while potentially being directed to emerging garden areas. Summer might bring water conservation practices during drier periods, with household activities adjusted to reduce consumption. The relationship with water illustrates how the Longhouse and its inhabitants functioned as an integrated system responding to resource availability across changing conditions. The Longhouse's adaptability extended even to gradual climate fluctuations across longer time periods. Archaeological evidence shows subtle evolutionary changes in Norse building practices responding to the medieval warm period, approximately 950–1250 CE, and the subsequent Little Ice Age cooling. Wall thicknesses, roof construction techniques, and interior arrangements shifted gradually to accommodate these longer-term climate trends while maintaining the basic longhouse form, evidence of a building tradition that valued responsive adaptation rather than rigid adherence to unchanging patterns. Perhaps most remarkably, this environmental responsiveness was achieved without modern technology, powered equipment, or fossil fuel inputs. The adaptive capacity of the Longhouse relied instead on careful observation, generational knowledge transfer, material understanding, and community cooperation. Seasonal maintenance and modifications became integrated into the annual cycle of community life, with specific tasks performed at appropriate times based on weather conditions and resource availability rather than arbitrary calendar dates. Modern sustainable building advocates have begun rediscovering many principles embedded in traditional longhouse design: passive solar orientation, thermal mass utilization, natural ventilation systems, living roofs, locally sourced materials, and adaptable space usage. What might have once been dismissed as primitive or simplistic is increasingly recognized as sophisticated ecological design, achieving comfortable human shelter with minimal environmental impact. The Longhouse stands as testimony to the possibility of creating dwellings in relationship with nature rather than in opposition to it. As evening approaches and the Longhouse settles into another night's configuration, perhaps with doors closed, against cooling temperatures, the hearth fire built up slightly to compensate, household members gathering more centrally than they might during midday warmth. We witness the subtle choreography of adaptation that characterized daily life. Within these remarkable structures, the Norse created not an unchanging fortress against nature, but a responsive vessel capable of riding the waves of seasonal change while maintaining the essential stability needed for human flourishing. The roof overhead, weather blanketed, with winter snow sprouting with spring growth, dry and warm in summer sun, or shedding autumn rain, remains always in conversation with the sky above and the earth below. This conversation, conducted through the medium of carefully selected and positioned materials, creates the protected intermediate zone where human life can unfold in relative security regardless of external conditions. The genius of the Longhouse lies not in imposing rigid human will upon the environment, but in creating something far more subtle and ultimately more successful: an adaptive interface between human needs and natural processes. As stars emerge, above the Longhouse roof now silhouetted against the darkening sky, we might reflect on how completely this dwelling embodies a particular relationship with the natural world, neither dominant nor submissive, but engaged in continuous responsive dialogue. The Norse, often characterized primarily as warriors and explorers, reveal through their vernacular architecture a profound ecological wisdom, the understanding that true security comes not from attempting to conquer natural forces, but from learning to dance with them through the changing seasons of life beneath a roof designed for all of nature's moods. The last embers of the hearth fire glow softly in the darkness, casting faint red light across the sleeping forms of the household. Outside, northern stars wheel above the Longhouse roof in their ancient patterns, the same stars that guided Norse ships across uncharted seas and illuminated countless generations of Longhouse dwellers before this night. As our journey through the world of the Viking Longhouse draws to a close, we turn our gaze not backward but forward, following the ripples of influence that flowed from these remarkable structures across time, leaving traces that persist, even into our modern world. The physical longhouses themselves have largely returned to the earth from which they rose. Wood decays, turf dissolves back into soil, and even stone foundations gradually disappear beneath centuries of accumulated sediment. Yet archaeological evidence reveals their ghostly outlines, dark soil stains marking where mighty support posts once stood, subtle differences in ground composition showing where walls contained hearths and human activity for generations. These archaeological traces, meticulously documented across Scandinavia, the North Atlantic islands, and even briefly in North America, provide tangible connection to the lived reality we have explored in previous chapters. More resilient than the structures themselves are the architectural principles they embodied. The practical wisdom of Longhouse design, its efficient use of local materials, its sophisticated response to climate challenges, its integration of human and animal shelter, continued to influence northern building traditions long after the Viking Age concluded. The later medieval Scandinavian houses, though smaller and increasingly divided into separate rooms, maintained core elements of Longhouse design principles. Even today, traditional rural buildings in Iceland, Norway, and other Nordic regions preserve echoes of this ancestral form in their proportions, roof treatments, and relationship to the landscape. Perhaps the most direct architectural descendants of the Longhouse are the surviving medieval stave churches of Norway. These remarkable wooden structures, though serving entirely different purposes than their secular ancestors, utilize many of the same construction techniques, particularly in their sophisticated post and lintel frameworks that create soaring interior spaces without modern engineering materials. The woodworking skills required for these churches developed directly from the tradition that raised longhouses across the Norse world, representing an unbroken transmission of knowledge from pagan dwelling to Christian sanctuary. The social patterns established within longhouse communities left equally significant legacies. The Nordic culture's distinctive approach to community governance, with their things, assemblies, where free individuals could speak on matters affecting the community, evolved in societies where the longhouse model of negotiated cooperation within shared space formed the foundation of daily experience. The democratic elements in modern Scandinavian societies, consistently ranked among the world's most egalitarian, may trace some of their roots to this longhouse legacy of balanced community life where extreme hierarchy proved impractical for shared survival. Family structures in Nordic countries similarly reflect longhouse influences. The emphasis on practical gender cooperation, despite clear gender roles, the relatively high status of women compared to many contemporary cultures, and the emphasis on children's graduated integration into productive activity all have connections to patterns established in longhouse-centered communities. Modern Nordic countries' renowned family policies, generous parental leave, strong childcare systems, and emphasis on work-life balance represent contemporary expressions of values with ancient roots in the practical family systems of their ancestors. Material culture connections link modern Nordic design directly to longhouse aesthetics. The renowned simplicity, functionality, and elegant use of natural materials that characterize Scandinavian design from furniture to architecture carry forward principles developed in longhouse craftsmanship. When a contemporary Danish or Swedish designer creates a chair that perfectly balances form and function without unnecessary ornamentation, they work within a tradition stretching back to ancestors who carved functional beauty into the high seats of smoky halls. The modern global appreciation for Nordic design aesthetics represents a delayed recognition of principles refined within longhouse walls. Literary echoes of longhouse culture resound through world literature, beginning with the great Icelandic sagas recorded in the 12th and 13th centuries. These remarkable narratives, many set during the Viking Age, frequently feature longhouses as central settings for crucial dramatic moments, feuds beginning during feast scenes, important decisions made by firelight, social relationships negotiated within the communal space. Even when later readers had no direct experience of Longhouse living, these literary descriptions kept alive the atmosphere and social dynamics of these distinctive dwellings, influencing countless subsequent literary traditions. The psychological legacy of Longhouse living emerges in distinctive Nordic cultural traits that persist into modern times. The capacity for comfortable silence in social settings, noted by many observers of contemporary Scandinavian societies, connects to Longhouse experiences where people shared space without constant interaction. The balance between community participation and personal independence characteristic of Nordic cultures reflects patterns established when individuals needed both strong social bonds and capacity for self-reliance within the Longhouse system. Even the stereotypical Nordic emotional reserve might have roots in adaptations to close-quarters living, where maintaining personal boundaries without physical separation required certain psychological adjustments. Religious and philosophical influences from Longhouse culture extended beyond Scandinavia through both peaceful exchange and Viking expansion. The Norse cosmology, with its emphasis on fatalism tempered by individual courage, its recognition of interconnection between human and natural worlds, and its clear-eyed acknowledgement of life's hardships, developed within communities, shaped by Longhouse experiences of interdependence and environmental challenge. Elements of this worldview filtered into European consciousness through cultural contact, becoming particularly influential during the Romantic period when Norse mythology experienced renewed appreciation and interpretation. The environmental relationship embodied in Longhouse design offers perhaps its most relevant legacy for contemporary concerns. The structure's emphasis on appropriate local materials, its sophisticated passive climate management, its integration with surrounding ecosystems, and its adaptability to changing conditions all represent principles increasingly valued in sustainable architecture. As modern societies grapple with climate change and resource limitations, the Longhouse offers an historical model of human shelter that maintained comfort while working with, rather than against, natural systems, achieving through accumulated wisdom what we now attempt to recreate through technology. Genetic and demographic legacies connect modern populations directly to Longhouse dwellers of the past. DNA studies reveal Viking genetic contributions across their sphere of influence, from Russia to Ireland, Iceland to Normandy, and beyond to North Atlantic settlements. These genetic echoes represent not just conquest, but the expansion of Longhouse culture through settlement, intermarriage, and the establishment of new communities modeled on ancestral patterns. Millions of people alive today carry genetic material that once moved through the daily activities of Longhouse life, creating direct biological connection across centuries. Cultural practices surrounding food preservation and preparation maintain particularly strong connections to Longhouse traditions. Traditional Nordic methods for smoking, drying, fermenting, and preserving foods, developed within the Longhouse economy, continue in both home and commercial production. The global culinary trend toward fermentation rediscovers techniques perfected in Longhouse kitchens where summer abundance had to create winter sustenance. The distinctive Nordic flavor palette, emphasizing smoke, salt, umami, and subtle herbal notes, evolved within the constraints and opportunities of Longhouse food systems. Craft traditions originating in Longhouse production continue in both traditional and contemporary forms. Modern knitters working with intricate Nordic patterns connect to generations of women who created essential warmth within Longhouse walls. Contemporary woodworkers using traditional tools maintain direct lineage to ancestors who fashioned Longhouse furnishings from local forests. Each time traditional techniques receive modern appreciation and adaptation, the practical knowledge developed within Longhouse communities gains renewed relevance and expression. Festivals and celebrations throughout the Nordic world preserve elements of seasonal observations that once marked the Longhouse year. Midsummer celebrations with their bonfires and all-night revelry connect to pre-Christian solstice observances. The traditions surrounding Christmas, Yule, maintain direct connections to midwinter feasting practices that once brightened the darkest days within Longhouse walls. These calendar-marking celebrations, though transformed by centuries of religious and cultural change, maintain rhythmic connection to the seasonal awareness essential to Longhouse survival. Linguistic traces of Longhouse life remain embedded in modern languages, both Nordic and those influenced by Norse contact. English, with its substantial Norse vocabulary contributions, preserves words for everyday objects and actions that once filled Longhouse existence. Architectural terminology, kinship terms, and descriptions of weather and landscape features carry forward the practical vocabulary of Longhouse dwellers into contemporary expression. Each time we use these words, we momentarily touch the linguistic world that once filled smoky halls with stories and conversation. Through tourism and historical reenactment, physical recreations of longhouses now stand in various locations across the former Norse world. These reconstructions, built using archaeological evidence and traditional techniques, provide experiential connection to ancestral dwelling forms. Visitors who step inside these spaces, experiencing their distinctive acoustics, lighting, and atmosphere, gain embodied understanding impossible through mere description. These recreated structures serve not just as museums but as portals, allowing contemporary people to briefly inhabit the sensory world of their ancestors. Educational curricula in Nordic countries and beyond ensure that knowledge of Longhouse culture passes to new generations. Children learn not just the dramatic aspects of Viking history, but gain appreciation for the everyday life that sustained Norse society between more sensational expeditions. This educational emphasis helps balance simplified popular culture representations with more nuanced understanding of a complex culture whose achievements extended far beyond the stereotypical image of horn-helmeted raiders. Perhaps most significantly, the values embedded in Longhouse design and function offer philosophical resources for contemporary challenges. The balance between individual and community needs, the emphasis on resilience through cooperation, the integration of practical function with cultural meaning, and the adaptive relationship with environmental conditions all represent wisdom, relevant to modern dilemmas. As global societies search for more sustainable and humanly satisfying ways of living, the Longhouse stands as one historical model worth renewed consideration. As the first light of dawn touches the eastern horizon, our imagined Longhouse begins to stir once more, another day beginning in a cycle that stretched across centuries of Norse existence. Though the physical structures have largely returned to Earth, their influence continues through countless channels, some obvious and others subtle, almost beyond recognition. The Longhouse teaches us that buildings are never merely physical constructions, but embodiments of cultural values, practical knowledge, social relationships, and environmental adaptations that continue to resonate long after the last hearthfire has cooled. In modern homes, with their separate rooms and technological comforts, we might occasionally sense a distant echo of Longhouse experience, perhaps when gathering with family around a fireplace on winter evenings, when working together on shared projects that require cooperation, or when sheltering through storms that remind us of our vulnerability to natural forces. In these moments, something ancient stirs in cultural memory, connecting us, however briefly, to ancestors who found ways to create meaning, beauty, and security within wooden walls beneath northern skies. As we conclude our journey through the world of the Viking Longhouse, we carry forward not just historical knowledge but a deeper appreciation for the ingenuity, resilience, and wisdom of those who created homes capable of nurturing civilization in challenging environments. Their legacy surrounds us in ways both recognized and unacknowledged. In architecture and design, in social structures and values, in relationship with the natural world, and in the persistent human quest to create dwellings that shelter not just our bodies, but our dreams, stories, and aspirations. The Longhouse, though physically vanished into archaeological shadows, continues its influence, a quiet witness to the enduring impact of solutions developed by people who understood that true dwelling embraces not just physical shelter, but the full integration of human lives with each other and with the natural world that both challenges and sustains us. In this understanding lies perhaps the most valuable legacy of all. A reminder that our built environments shape not just our comfort, but our consciousness, our relationships, and our place within the continuing story of human habitation there. This shared earth. Dear listener, as our journey through the Viking Longhouse draws to a close, I hope these tales have offered not just historical knowledge, but a deeper connection to the human experience across time. Perhaps in your dreams tonight, you might find yourself for a moment beneath smoke-darkened rafters, warmed by a central hearth, surrounded by the murmur of voices speaking an ancient tongue, yet expressing hopes and concerns not so different from our own. May this glimpse of our shared human past bring you peaceful rest and renewed appreciation for the shelter that embraces you, whatever form it may take. The Longhouse has shared its stories. Now drift gently into your own dreams, carried by the timeless rhythm of human lives finding warmth against the darkness outside.